Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, How Text and Data Mining Uncovers Hidden Data Points and Powers New Discoveries, which is sponsored by Springer Nature. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. All of the attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our presenter. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions in throughout. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions that you like. Also, there's both AI-generated and human-generated closed captioning available for today's session. Send that through. For live captioning provided by One-to-One Captions, please use the link in the chat box in either Google Chrome or Firefox. You can also enter your email to receive the transcript after the event. For Zoom's AI-generated captions, please click the CC Live Transcript button on the bottom panel of your screen to adjust closed captioning settings or to view the session transcript. Last, please note that we are recording today's program and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version. And with that, we are ready to get started. So I will pass it over to Prathik.
Thanks, Sabrina. And thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure being here, and thank you for having me on this webinar. Let me go ahead and share my screen now. Okay. All right, just to confirm, you are able to see my screen? Excellent. All right. So once again, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I'm Prathik, and I work for Springer Nature as the Group Product Manager for Data Solutions. And I look forward to presenting text and data mining and how we are using text and data mining in Springer Nature to work with our partners, which are academic institutions, government labs, even corporates, for instance, to uncover new insights, as well as power and accelerate new discoveries in the scientific space. What we'll cover today is text and data mining, why it's important, the types of text and data mining and its impact that we see today, the different use cases that we have come across, and of course, we'll provide an overview of where we see the future of text and data mining kind of moving forwards. Now, typically, I like to start off with talking about the researchers, because at the end of the day, that is whom we build our products for. The content, everything surrounding that is meant for researchers. So everywhere that we see, researchers are essentially coping with information overload. And we had Google, who kind of brought about the search engine in the 1990s. And we have Google Scholar, for instance, which was focusing solely on scientific content. In this case, filtering content based on literature as well as patterns on later stages. Then we had more social network coming in, as well as other scientific related social network sites. For instance, you have ResearchGate, as well as WeChat, which started off as a social network, but it has kind of encompassed a lot of information related to STEM, and kind of connects and has this bridge from between publishers as well as researchers out there. A lot of these researchers tend to use such services to read papers, but can of course miss the content because there is a lot of content out there, and finding the almost to say the data in a needle kind of haystack is quite difficult. And that is where we see the role of machine learning and artificial intelligence playing a huge role. Now, where machine learning and artificial intelligence has really taken off in the last few years is mostly summarizing content. Previously, this was a manual exercise, often delegated to junior researchers. I've been a researcher for nearly 10 years, working in the lab. So I'm familiar with the process of literature review, where I've often had to collect information from various sources, journals, books, for instance, as well as perhaps internal data sets that we are producing in our laboratories, and then combining them all together to make sense of it. But all of this process can now be automated through artificial intelligence, as we can perform summarization activities, which allows us to kind of free the time researchers have to do the most important part of their work, which is run experiments. So artificial intelligence, as we see, seems to be maturing from what might generally be available on the surface as far as making recommendations. It could help now with making decisions all around the content that researchers are searching for. For instance, of course, you can always go to Google. That is one of the most common machine learning platforms out there, where it might be able to tell you, for instance, based on your keywords, what kind of information is most suitable for you. There are artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms being used in research today. There are plenty of products that focuses on writing or also auto-summarizing text from journals and books. And this is something of critical importance to researchers because it can really help them save time. Why is this important? As we all know, in R&D, as well as in academic and government labs, it's very important for researchers to spend more time in the labs doing these experiments and to find the right data set that can help them run the best experiments, optimize their experiments, and so on. In order to do that, of course, as we mentioned earlier, it's important to perform literature review. One example that I tend to give is COVID-19. So obviously, we are all familiar with what's happened over the last 2 years with the pandemic, but similar trends can be observed in academic circles as far as research being produced. So at Springer Nature itself, we have seen thousands of articles being submitted, which are related to COVID-19. But of course, across the entire publishing industry, there's a lot of information that is coming in for COVID-19. If I remember correctly, sometime in early 2021, there were about 300,000 articles submitted in a span of a few months related to COVID-19, which meant it was really difficult for researchers who were working on perhaps making vaccines or maybe finding drugs that could help treat COVID-19, and then sort through that information to identify the data points, which could be, for instance, drugs, or kind of connect the symptoms with COVID, was very difficult because they had to read through all of those hundreds of thousands of articles to identify the best possible article that is talking about a specific symptom or is talking about a specific drug, perhaps, to connect it with COVID-19. And this is just one example. We've seen similar trends across other sectors, other industries, where suddenly there's been a big impetus in terms of producing research connected with solving a critical problem that the world is facing today. Of course, another major area that we see a lot of interest in is environmental and sustainability and growth, for instance, or also the United Nations SDGs, which is, again, a very important area. It's important, though, for researchers, as we mentioned again, to identify the best possible articles. Now, one of the ways that artificial intelligence is kind of changing the landscape of research is to digest and enrich the information at scale. What does that mean? So we have journal articles or book chapters that are being produced. Now, within those journal articles and book chapters, often you might use, for instance, the platform where you can search for a specific keyword, or even say go to Google Scholar or search by a specific keyword. So for instance, if you search for, say, the words solar cell, right? Just to give you an example, what tends to happen behind the scenes is it searches for the word solar separately and it searches for the word cell separately. And that means that you often see hundreds of thousands of millions of results kind of showing up. Now, the problem with that technique is that because it's searching for those keywords on an individual level, solar and cell, cell might go on to be a biological cell. in the context of what the researcher is trying to search for, which is solar cell, biological cells might not be relevant at all. And hence, they are going to come across a lot of irrelevant results. So a lot of these underlying techniques have actually started to change over the last few years. And this change is driven by the fact that instead of searching via keywords, machine learning algorithms are being developed where you can search via concepts. So now if you were to search for the word solar cell, the machine learning algorithm is able to go through the full text of the article and understand when an article is actually talking about the two words solar cells and remove any information or any articles that might have been talking about biological cells, for instance, unless for some reason the both of them are interconnected. How does this happen? Now, this tends to happen by the ML or the machine learning algorithm being able to digest the information from journal articles from publishers such as Springer Nature by ingesting all the full text from the journal article in a format such as XML. Now, PDFs, which is generally used by researchers to read journal articles or perhaps even book chapters, is not the best possible format for the purpose of AI, machine learning, and as we'll see in just a few minutes, text and data mining. The reason for that is PDF formats can't really be read by machine, it's not really compatible with machine intelligence. And that's why we need those rich text formats and very specific industry formats such as JATs for journals or bits for books, which is a type of XML format. And we see a lot of academic users. So we have a lot of academic users, for instance, who are performing these kind of studies or are carrying on investigations, developing these ML algorithms, or even the corporate sector, as we see companies from Alphabet, which owns Google, producing other companies such as DeepMind, where they have these artificial intelligence, or as I'll share an example, a real example a little later on, where we have worked with companies, where we have worked with researchers to find specific drugs that could really help with COVID, for instance. And this is where AI is really moving towards. And we see, of course, a lot of impact in the field of biotech, life sciences, and pharma, but this is also really relevant in the field of material science, energy, engineering, and almost every field that we can think of seems to have some kind of effect with respect to this. But one of the examples that I've shared out here today is the example on Pubmed.com, which specifically that is using machine and deep learning. As we see, these are the kind of specialities that seems to be very popular for machine learning, artificial intelligence, and text and data mining. So what exactly is happening out there? I won't go too much into the details of this, but essentially what tends to happen is these machine learning or AI algorithms kind of go through the full text of the articles, and they are able to classify the various aspects of the article. For instance, is it talking about a gene? Is it talking about a specific disease? Or is it talking about symptoms? And then they are able to cluster them based on a specific group. So once they have that categorized, they can then score the relationship between the two types of categories. For instance, maybe they find that the number of times a symptom has been mentioned versus a disease could be ranked higher, because every single time the journal article refers to that symptom being connected with the disease. And hence the score that is produced by the machine learning algorithm is higher versus, say, if the symptom is not really mentioned too much in connection with the disease, in which case the score is lower. And that really tells the AI that, okay, this symptom might be specifically linked with this disease. And then we can kind of use that symptom to find the best possible drug to treat that disease. And that's just one example, again, within the pharmaceutical or life sciences, as researchers in lab tend to use these kind of algorithms. Similarly, of course, this is also having an effect in patent growth, both for academic and government labs, where they want to scale their research to the industry, or perhaps go on to find novel techniques that could be used to create their own startups, perhaps. And it's important for them to identify the best possible connections and relationships that allow them to come up with new discoveries, which of course they can then go on to use to file patents. Now, most of this that I spoke about just now is talking about AI on a fairly surface level, but there are other kind of insights that's important when it comes to compliance, innovation, and promotion. So here we look at, for instance, is AI able to monitor at what scale is the information that is being produced is precise? Or, for instance, could it be missing a part of diversity or ethics and inclusion, which is a very important topic these days within the pharmaceutical industry or life science or materials science or engineering and so on. And then they can link all of these diverse sources that are coming in. Remember, of course, machine learning and artificial intelligence requires as much data set as possible, and hence they rely on not just publishers such as Springer Nature. Of course, there are other really good publishers out there, but also patents or industrial data sets or clinical trial information or data sets that are being produced in the industry and so on and so forth. So all of this information kind of flows into their system that allows their machine learning algorithm to get better. And of course, finally, this can then be used to actually create real products to help users out there, which is the ultimate goal. So the way this knowledge management tends to work is that we see that this is being structured in 4 different levels. So for instance, first, AI is generally used to generate some kind of hypothesis or to make decisions. And then this is used to connect the links within the journal articles and could then go on to be used to predict trends. And of course, this depends on some kind of structure like text images and so on, which can also be gone on to use in downstream applications. The value level in which we kind of see this kind of moving is on a very basic level. We see the data that is being generated in publicly available sources, such as say PubMed, or in publishers such as Springer Nature or other publishers out there. And of course, there are other sources of information such as patents, conference data, and so on. Then we can enrich this information via the metadata can be enriched. We can have ontologies, taxonomies, which essentially is those entities and categorization of information that I was speaking about earlier. For instance, you can categorize a specific type of symptom, or you can categorize a disease, you can categorize a material, a property, or any of these kind of sets. Even in social sciences, I'll share some really interesting examples of how we are seeing this play out in the real world, again, in just a few moments, which I think will speak about how text and data mining and artificial intelligence is really changing what we are seeing in research and development, both in academia and corporate, especially for predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics, which essentially allows you to predict what is likely to happen if you change the parameters of the experiment, for instance. At Springer Nature, of course, we are trying to work on all of these different value levels. So for instance, at the base level, we of course have our content, which is journals and books. We are then making this content available to researchers in rich text format, which or XML, for instance, which then they can use to plug directly into their code, or perhaps use it to develop any kind of machine learning or AI-based intelligence, which can then answer certain questions. So this is the second level that we are working on. We are also building products around artificial intelligence, which could help summarize the information and solve the problem of information overload. Say, for instance, you at an academic institution or a government lab, or even a corporate sector company, you have 100,000 books, for instance, and you are working in a very specific sector, and you don't possibly have the time to go through 100,000 book chapters. So how do you identify which are the most important book chapters or which are the most important journal articles? Sure, you can search based on keywords, But you still need to read those articles or read those book chapters. And perhaps the entire book chapter and the entire article, especially when you have hundreds of thousands of them, might not be easy to go through. So what we are doing is we are leveraging the techniques of text and data mining to build AI applications which can auto summarize the text in the book chapters as well as journal articles, and then cluster that together such that we can help the research institutions or the libraries as well as grant agencies identify the most important parts of the chapters or the most important parts of the articles, which the researchers really need to read in order to make the best possible decisions for their experiments or investigation. And that goes on to our fourth level, which is even more deeper insights. For instance, we are working on techniques that allow us to pull data directly out of the content. For instance, let's say somebody wants to know, can you tell me exactly the property or the conductivity value of a material? And we can point out to the exact value. And this is possible by extraction using machine learning. This is a lot more difficult, and generally we like to call this as the fourth level, and is one of the hardest things to do. But this is also something that we are really working on within Springer Nature, trying to live at the cutting edge of artificial intelligence. I see there's one question already. If that's all right, I'll probably take the questions towards the end, and I think that will, I think we can do that. So, kind of moving towards text and data mining, a quick introduction and use case. As I mentioned earlier, text and data mining is what we like to think of as the second level in the process of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So before I dive in deeper into text and data mining, it might be useful for us to just see how the impact of or the importance of this is to the data and research community. Now, when you think about the evolution of information retrieval over the ages, we started out, of course, with print indexes, and that was pretty exciting. That you could go into a print index and find all the articles that were indexed on a specific topic and write down bibliographic citations. For instance, you could go to the library and pull the article from the shelf, and that was also really cutting edge for the time. We then started getting bibliographic databases, and in this case, what tended to happen was we could perform some kind of advanced search, such as Boolean searches, and that was also very revolutionary for the time. Now, instead of just finding articles on a specific topic, we could, of course, find articles on articles on a certain topic, for instance, to narrow this down further, focusing on a query. That was possible using full text databases as the next evolution into the content search space. Finally, of course, we have now, over the last few years, arrived at semantic enrichment and text and data mining as part of the process in the library, as part of the process in the research and development for our researchers out there and information professionals. So the most important part here for us is that we are able to dive in. Yeah, I see card catalogs, absolutely. So within text and data mining, the most important part for us is we need to be able to go to the full text, right? So once we go into the full text, we know which parts of the article is talking about the query that we are making. So for instance, the example that I shared earlier about solar cells, it's not really useful if the solar cell keyword actually turns up in the references section, right? We want the solar cell keyword to actually turn up in the results and discussion part, or perhaps in the experiment part of the paper, maybe even the abstract. Of course, the abstract is generally available, but once we have access to the full text, the algorithm can actually go and identify where this keyword actually turns up. Thereby, it allows us to actually understand the context behind the search as well. So within the AI landscape, and this is something that I spoke about earlier, so I won't go into it too much, we classify text and data mining as part of the machine learning and artificial intelligence process. And it's a very critical layer to build machine learning or artificial intelligence capabilities. So once libraries are able to kind of take advantage of text and data mining, they are able to provide this information to the researchers such that they can plug this real XML format, the rich format, into any kind of system, especially code, which allows them to find out those trends as well as discover new information that they might not have been able to previously. Breaking this down further, within TDM, of course, we define this as an automated process, which allows us to select and analyze large volumes of text or data. Now, this is mainly to increase discoverability and also to help with trend analysis, patterns, and establishing relationships. So for instance, we are now able to kind of dig in deeper and go into analyzing the full text and finding out examples such as a keyword such as glutamate, for instance, and how is it connected to an obsessive compulsive disorder, or what exactly is the effect of glutamate on OCD, for instance. To go in further, there are two types of use cases as we see within text and data mining. And this is mainly to, I'm sorry, again, I'm looking at the chat and apologies. Of course, I'll make sure that I answer all of your questions. So within text and data mining, discoverability is one of them. Now here, we mainly use it to find content, to do a better job to find a particular piece of content, right? So in this case, what we're trying to do is we want to make sure that we are able to, let's say, perform a text and data mining project that is focused on increasing discoverability, which is, of course, the holy grail of information science or information retrieval. Basically, that means it is trying to increase recall versus, say, increasing precision. Now, when you have all of these materials, you can then match what you're looking for and then eliminate any irrelevant material from this discovery process. So that's generally the first kind of use case that we're looking for. Now, the idea is for us in text and data mining to connect these different kind of symptoms, as I mentioned, and this is one of those examples where how glutamate might be connected with OCD, for instance. The other kind of case is pattern discernment. And in pattern discernment, what tends to happen is we are not necessarily looking to search for a specific keyword. What we are looking for is not even an article. We are looking for the best possible prediction of what might happen and some kind of suggestion on the likely process if you are searching for something. So, or a trend analysis, as we like to call it in machine learning lingo. So, for instance, perhaps you want to find out all the materials that are being researched by scientists for the purpose of increasing battery capacity in the last 5 years. Are there specific nanomaterials, perhaps, that they are working with that we see an increasing trend in publishing, for instance? Or it could be applied in any specific field. It could be, for instance, to identify possible drugs which are actually successful in treating certain types of cancers. So what are the trend analysis? What are the trends that we are seeing in a specific sector or in a specific area is what we try to discern using the second type of use case. At this time, I just wanted to very quickly maybe ask everyone out there, like, have you come across TDM services in general earlier, or even come across these two use cases? So there's a quick poll in front of your screen, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Okay, that's great. So I see that there's an interesting split here where about 20% of the crowd have already come across text and data mining, and you hear about it quite often. And about half the audience have come across it, but on an infrequent basis, and around 35% are hearing about it for the first time, which I think is pretty reflective of where we see text and data mining in research and development today. Those who are performing advanced use cases are using text and data mining, machine learning heavily, but there's an increasing interest to kind of move towards this next generation of information retrieval, which is text and data mining. This is very helpful for me as I kind of dive in slightly more deeper within this to show you some real examples. Generally, by nature, I prefer not doing slides, but text and data mining is slightly different where I need to provide some of this context. I wouldn't worry too much about reading through what's available out here, but let me share a real example of how text and data mining is being used today. So in the early days of COVID-19, there was a startup company actually that we are working with right now, which I'll show you an example of again in just a moment. One of the things that they were able to do was they were able to go through the information in our journal articles of Springer Nature and trying to identify drugs that could possibly be reused for the purpose of treating COVID-19. And roughly within 3 to 4 weeks, they were able to train their machine learning algorithm by going through our journals, by ingesting our information from XML and coming up with a list of drugs that could be potential candidates. And one of those drugs, which is being used even today, has been found to be very successful in treating COVID-19. And they were able to do that in such a short frame of time by going through hundreds of thousands of these articles, which I mentioned earlier related to COVID-19, and identify and create those relationships between the symptoms as well as any drugs that have been in the market, or perhaps what scientists are actually working on today in their laboratories and have published a paper. However, we see that there's still a lot to do in the field of text and data mining. The reason why I like to give the example of pharma or life science is because we see a lot of use cases, real use cases in this sector, and we find that this to be a little more mature versus some of the other areas. So for researchers working with biosciences or life sciences, they are heavily using text and data mining for this purpose. And in this case, what tends to happen is, despite all of this information being available, it's actually quite difficult to pinpoint this information, as I was talking about earlier. And the reason for that is that there's this pressing need to understand these fundamental problems that exist in disease pathology or biological systems, for instance, to find out the most cost-effective way or the most efficient way to create those relationships between, say, a symptom or a drug or a chemical probe or a gene, or to find out these kind of new medicines. So that underlying development of chemical probes and drug leads is what is known from the past. And we need to try and understand what general rules can be learned that can be useful in the future. So this is the example that I was talking about earlier. Benevolent AI is an outstanding AI company that's actually working by using scientific literature. And they have researchers who go through this information by training their machine learning algorithm from scientific literature, patient records, patterns, clinical trials, to create these kind of relationships to answer questions such as which genes are associated with a medical condition, which compounds have been shown to affect it, and so on and so forth. And as I mentioned earlier, there are other great examples as well. For instance, Alphabet, Google's parent company, has DeepMind, which has been mining data repositories to crack the protein folding mystery, for instance. And now they have a wing called Isomorphic that is also using it to accelerate drug discovery. And all of this is happening by mining this information. And we are able to supply or provide this information via APIs that we have developed. So we work with companies, we work with researchers in academia and government by understanding their needs and understanding the best possible way to deliver this information to them. And this can be, say, for instance, a researcher in a university might want this information delivered to their cloud, for instance. We can do that. We have developed APIs that we allow the researchers to actually use to mine this information from Springer Nature's journals and books again. Of course, they can combine this information with other data sets, which is usually necessary in the field of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And it really allows for all of these interesting applications, such as, say, cancer diagnosis, or, for instance, finding out drugs that could be used to treat COVID-19. Just to mix things up and not to show you only life science or pharma examples, like I mentioned, this is also being used in material science or energy or engineering. So for instance, here what we are doing is we are able to work with researchers where maybe they want to map X-rays and they want to find out what kind of crystal structure is connected and can then be used for certain experiments, for instance. And they're able to run machine learning algorithms through this. Generally, there's a lot of spectroscopy data that you might be familiar with, and machine learning and text and data mining can go through the images and classify the images and then really help on this effect as well. As far as trend analysis goes, of course, in academia and industry, we see that there's so much information out there. We are seeing, for example, universities work with nearly millions of publications and patterns, and they can really help in understanding those trends within those industry. And of course, for these two very specific kind of projects, which is discoverability and pattern discernment. Here, I also wanted to, in just a bit, ask you another question, but let me quickly suggest or provide some information on how do you reach out to your researchers and understand when they need text and data mining. So in this case, one of the things that you can really help your researchers with or understand is, are there any existing open access knowledge models out there that you can use? There are a few out there. In fact, Springer Nature itself has an open access knowledge model called SciGraph, and hundreds of thousands of researchers use it. We have an open access API out there that allows you to mine the content that Springer Nature has. So we are trying to do whatever we can to really help researchers identify the best possible use cases through that open access content. And when you're talking to researchers, I would encourage you to share this with them, our open access API, which I can of course share, and also other knowledge models that are out there. The only thing that I would caution is some of the knowledge models that might be out there might be slightly outdated. One of the advantages of using Springer Natures is, of course, we are updating this content and making sure that that content gets added to our open access API for all our open access content, so that the researchers have the most relevant as well as updated data available for them. Now here, I wanted to kind of pause, and we're almost at this close of the session. Before I take your questions, like, where do you see, I mentioned two use cases, discoverability, which is searching for information, and trend analysis, which is like pattern discernment. Where do you think that you would see the most impact for your researchers in your institutions, for instance? Of course, there's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious about your thoughts. Right. So I think there's a pretty interesting split. Most of you have actually said trend analysis, maybe 60%, and about 37% of you have said discoverability, and 4% others. In my experience over the last 3 to 4 years, I would say about 70% of the use cases that I've seen is with discoverability. But increasingly, the use cases that I tend to see from academic researchers, as well as those who are working in the industry, no matter the field, science, engineering, social sciences, or geosciences, or any of these fields, for instance, trend analysis is becoming an increasingly important use case. So I think you're pretty spot on in terms of the split between discoverability and trend analysis. And this is what we are seeing as well. Just to end things before I take some of your questions, is that, as I mentioned earlier, Springer Nature has several APIs that help researchers perform text and data mining. So we, for instance, have our metadata API that gives you metadata. We have a full text API, open access API, and all of this allows you to mine the content for Nature journals, and Springer journals and Springer books. So this makes it a lot more easier for the researchers to understand and mine the content for your machine learning as well as artificial intelligence needs. And if you want more information, this is available at dev.springernature.com, as well as Springer Nature's text and data mining page, where you can find all of this information as well as use cases, white papers, and so on. With that, I'd like to thank you for listening in to our text and data mining webinar. A huge credit to Mary Ellen Bates, who has done a couple of white papers for us and has done a lot of research with respect to text and data mining, and internally to Marcus and Chris Pendall, who have helped provide some of the content that I've presented to you today for text and data mining. So once again, thank you so much. I think I'll take some of the questions now, and feel free to add those questions to the Q&A. I'll try and answer them to the best of my capabilities.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Pratik. Looks like, yeah, we have a bunch of questions. So, but like you said, if anyone has any additional questions that you don't see in the Q&A, feel free to type them in there because we have some time.
Sure.
Okay, so let's kick it off. It looks like Jennifer has a question here who asks, I keep hearing about TDM and ML with STEM examples. What about social science corpus and AI? Where to go to find more about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I apologize if I focus a lot on sciences. It's probably due to my background, but I think we are seeing similar trends in social sciences as well. Our APIs cover the content in social sciences, and of course, it really depends on the use cases as far as what researchers want to perform text and data mining within the social sciences fields. I'm not familiar with a lot of use cases in there, but the APIs that we have cover the breadth of content available, within the social sciences field. So we know that there are researchers out there in academic institutions also using text and data mining within social sciences. If you're interested in very specific use cases, I can definitely go back and reach out to my colleagues and ask if they are familiar with some of these use cases, and I can share that with you offline, if that's all right. But there's definitely a lot of interest within that field as well. Slightly different topic of geosciences, and I am conscious of time. I know it's a tangential area, of course, but an interesting use case that I came across several months ago was actually to where seismologists were mining the text in journals and books to actually predict earthquakes as well as volcanic eruptions. If you remember that there was a volcanic eruption not so long ago, which really caused a lot of loss of lives. And some of this actually can be stopped by understanding the trends and patterns with respect to seismographs. And there's some very interesting work that is being done with geosciences there. This is one use case that I can think of outside of the pharma life sciences that I shared. And also I remember there was some kind of use case which I cannot elaborate at the moment, but had to do with paleontology as well. So I know that there are other very, very interesting use cases with text and data mining that is being performed with respect to machine learning and artificial intelligence. I hope that kind of answers your question, but I can definitely try and get back to you on that. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and I think Kimberly had a similar question. So I know your email's up there about, so if they want to reach out about social science research, I'm sure they can.
Absolutely.
Great. Let's see, another question here. We have a couple questions about pricing. So maybe, let's see, Cody's question is, can you speak to TDM service pricing? How are pricing models developed? Goes on, sometimes we get outrageous quotes for seemingly routine TDM services.
Well, I have good news here. If you're an academic and government institution and you have access to Springer Nature, you actually get text and data mining for your researchers for free. So you can actually use all of our APIs. And yeah, and we are more than happy to help your researchers out. So there's no question of pricing there at all. So yeah, no worries if that's what you're interested in. Yeah.
Great. Let's see. Okay, we have another question here who asks, how can we move from library catalogs of PDFs to something that is machine readable? And they go on to say, I'm currently trying to OCR hundreds of thousands of files, but most of the OCR text files are not great quality. Should we be working to have the files created in XML format with structured headings or rich text format?
Yeah, no, that's a great question as well. So this is definitely the challenge, and I can tell you that for Springer Nature itself, obviously we are a very old publisher, and a lot of our content was available in PDFs. It took time. I mean, it just going through millions of these articles and then converting them to XML and in a machine readable format took years actually, and you have to pick the right software or perhaps build it in-house or work with a vendor who has the experience of converting these PDFs into machine readable formats or OCRs. There are a few out there. I can certainly suggest if you're interested in it, but it's hard. And I would definitely recommend that if you're producing content, especially internal content at your institution, make it available in rich text format right at the offset moving forwards. And I would completely ignore PDF if that were possible, because this is definitely the way forward when it comes to using it for machine learning and artificial intelligence. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Great. Let's see, another question here who asks, what about fake or poor, unvalidated, or intentionally manipulated data available for pattern discernment? Are there filters of sort in machine learning?
Good question. I'm not sure I'm super qualified to answer that. I would say that, I mean, as we know in machine learning, the old saying goes garbage in, garbage out. So if you have bad data coming in, you're probably going to have bad data coming out. And unfortunately, this problem has to be stopped right at the source. So it's important, and I think here publishers have an important role to play, wherein we are able to identify sources where the data is bad or perhaps manipulated. For instance, we are also working, and there are other companies that I know of working on machine learning algorithms that can identify if the images within a paper has been manipulated. For instance, it has been duplicated using Photoshop or other kind of techniques. Or for example, the data points that might be there in a table just has does not have many outliers at all, or perhaps something is strange about the data set out there. In order to do that, the best way is to encourage researchers to provide the raw data, which of course is trying to identify any problems that might be there in the source. And then we can kind of ingest the data to create the best possible solutions or the best possible outcome back for the researcher. As far as, and I think one of the question was, what about any filters that might be available in the machine learning system right now. There are no filters available in the APIs to understand that. But as I spoke about a little earlier, there are machine learning algorithms that can help determine if parts of an image or parts of a data is not right or is not really reproducible. So one example that I can share right now is, again, and I apologize, again, it's in the field of life sciences, is antibodies. Antibodies play a very crucial role in of course, for diseases. And some of the greatest reproducibility crisis that we see is with relation to antibodies. So I know internally we have been working to actually identify antibodies and how many times a specific antibody is actually being used for in relation to a disease. That allows us to internally score certain things, and this can then be utilized in platforms such as for researchers to use in methods or protocols, if you're familiar with that. And then we train machine learning algorithms using that score. This is just a very small example that I shared, but there are algorithms, as I mentioned, that is trying to tackle this issue. But I expect this to remain a challenge over the next 5 to 10 years. But there are solutions that are coming up. Yeah.
Great. Okay, let's see. Some other questions here. One, again, from Jennifer, who asks, do you think discoverability is the opposite of innovation? Will TDM focus on a solution or eliminate possibilities?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question. I would say it's, it's both sides of the same coin, right? So if you eliminate irrelevant results, you are likely finding information which would really help you innovate, which would really get to your best possible outcome in the quickest possible manner and the most efficient manner. However, you're also right about the fact that what tends to happen with machine learning, and I'm not claiming that machine learning is the holy grail or is going to 100% of the time solve problems. It can eliminate perfectly good results because of the data set that it has ingested, right? So it can be either due to poor data that has been ingested. It could be because the data set that it has ingested is very limited. For instance, we see that there might be a data set that talks about deforestation within certain areas of the planet. And it could be such that the factors that is leading to deforestation in a particular area of the planet might not necessarily be related to deforestation in another part of the planet due to, say, for example, completely different soil nutrients, etc. So it's important that when the data set that is provided, we provide as comprehensive a data set as possible for text and data mining purposes so that researchers are able to get to the best possible outcome that helps them innovate and not miss out on key parts. So I would say for now, the precision is pretty good at about 85% from what I'm seeing, which allows people to come across more innovative solutions more often than not, and not necessarily eliminate the results that they might have been looking for that might have been important to them during the innovation process. I apologize if that's not the most articulate answer that I provided, but that's generally what I'm seeing within this field. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Let's see. 2 more questions. Victor asks, any news about the Scriptinator? If you can speak to that.
I unfortunately don't have a lot of information about that, but I can revert if you're interested. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't know much about it. Yeah.
Great. And then sort of along new products collaborations, are there any collaborations between Springer Nature and other companies or platforms, perhaps competitions?
Well, I mean, it's definitely a fair question and a feasible or rather an important question. So my perspective in this has always been the more, and as you know, as a former researcher, as a scientist who is working to help other researchers find the best possible information for them to innovate, I think it's important that we collaborate as much as possible. And my endeavor and my team's endeavor is definitely to look at other platforms. And I know Springer Nature is, of course, working closely with other platforms out there, for instance, like ResearchGate and others, such that we can disseminate this information. As far as text and data mining goes, this is a fairly nascent field, and we are trying to work with small startups as well as other larger companies out there who might have advanced TDM use cases. So as we learn more of this information, we will provide all of this information on Springer Nature for you to consume. And I'll make sure that is available to all of you to consume. So yeah, I mean, so there's definitely a lot of interest that we are seeing in text and data mining in the corporate world. Yeah.
Great. Let's see. We have a question from Mohammed who asks, how can we determine the efficiency of artificial intelligence in processing big data in blind learning?
So I probably ask a couple of clarifying questions here. When you're referring to blind learning, I'm just curious to understand, are you referring to blind learning in the context of artificial intelligence, or are you referring to accessibility as an important area within artificial intelligence?
Important distinction. But in the meantime, we've had a few people ask about the slides. I will mention that we have recorded today's session, and everyone who registered will receive a link to the recording. So I'll just let everyone know that.
If there are no other questions, I can try and quickly answer to what I think about the efficiency of AI is concerned. And I would say determining the efficiency of AI is pretty much based on how you want to prioritize the recall versus precision, which is the classic problem in big data. Essentially, do you want more relevant content, or do you want the most amount of content which is reasonably relevant? And it really depends on your priority and your use case and how you want to tweak it. Ideal scenario, of course, is 100% precision and accuracy, but that's never going to happen. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Let's see. I think that's mostly it. I will mention that your email is on the slide, so is it okay if anyone wants to reach out and ask?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Please feel free to reach out. I'm here. If you have any questions related to text and data mining, happy to answer. Machine learning, AI, even if I don't know the answers, I'll make sure that I ask my colleagues. We have lots of great colleagues out here who are more than happy to help or even answer questions. For example, the ones that I was not able to answer with respect to social sciences. I really wish I could, but I want to make sure that I can get back to you on that. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, I think we're pretty much at the end. So just thank you so much to Prathik for taking the time to present for us today. It's a really informative discussion. And thanks to our attendees for your questions and comments. We did record today's session, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we'd really appreciate it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the session, and we hope to see you again in the near future on another webinar.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.